Hola todos! Irregular verbs are super common in Spanish, so I'm going to whiz through lots of irregular verbs and their conjugations in the present, preterite, imperfect, future, and conditional tenses. This list doesn't include the subjunctive, which you also need to know some irregular verbs for. And not all of the conjugations are irregular in all of the tenses, so I'm going to point out where some of the irregularities are. So starting off with dar, a pretty good verb meaning to give. The present participle, so for example, if you were to say I am giving, that would be estoy dando, and I have given, maybe he dado. So the present perfect tense, you would say something like he dado. So that's what these ones on the left are. Your present participle and your past participle, dando and dado, those are perfectly fine, those aren't irregular. Okay, and then looking at the verbs themselves, there's only a few like irregularities in the present tense. So doy and dice, that a there is irregular. The other ones are perfectly normal or perfectly fine. Then throughout the preterite tense, we have the letter I. So diste, dio, dimos, distes, dieron, dimos, distes, and dieron all have the letter I in there, and the rest of them are fine. All of the latter ones are perfectly regular. In the imperfect tense, there's only 3 irregulars in the entire language: ser, ver, and ir. So the majority of these are regular in the imperfect tense. Dastar, a really good verb for foundation, higher tier, A level, all sort of levels need to know this verb, a really common verb. Then decir is different to hablar. Hablar is like to speak. You might have seen like diría que, and this is irregular. We're not saying deciría as you normally would in the future, or in this case, the conditional tense. Decir becomes dir. It's a new stem here. So all of these future tense, which is here, and the conditional tense, which is there, are irregular in terms of the dir. It's not decir, it's dir. Then the imperfect tense is fine. The preterite tense, lots of irregularities with the d and the I and the j. So dije, dijiste, dijo, dijimos, dijistes, dijeron. And then in the present tense, just a couple of them are stem changing. The e becomes the I. So digo, dices, dice, and dicen. But not too bad in terms of the irregularities, but definitely a good verb to learn, decir. And then looking at the present and past participles, so defiendo is irregular. The I in there comes out sort of nowhere. It's irregular, that first I, defiendo. And the past participle dicho is also irregular. We're not saying decido, we're saying dicho. And then swiftly moving on to estar, a very common verb to be, estar and ser. Both of these are perfectly fine. Estando and estado are not irregular. And then moving on to the actual conjugations themselves. So there are quite a few irregularities in this one, namely or mainly the preterite tense, the sort of tuve ending, tuviste, tuvo, a lot of that sort of tuv in there. This follows the same pattern as tener, which we should see later on. The latter, sort of after the e and the s, it follows the tener conjugation. So tuve, tuviste, tuvo is the preterite tense conjugations for tener, but together is the conjugations for estar. So estuve, estuviste, etc. And the present tense, quite a few irregulars. So again, the y comes out of nowhere there. A lot of these I forms in the present tense have the letter y, like we saw earlier. Doy, estoy, and the accents there as well. Estás, está, and lastly están. They normally don't have the accent, but here they do in the present tense for estad. And the latter ones are all fine. The imperfect and the future and conditional ones are fine. Okay, haber is quite an interesting verb, quite a tricky one. So this means to have in terms of as a compound tense. So in English, if I said, I have eaten, that's where we're going to use this version of haber. If we were to say I have a phone, we're going to use tener. I have a phone, we're going to use tener for possessions. So haber is pretty irregular here. So for example, the E again comes out of nowhere, HE. The other ones are okay. However, just to point out for I is also a present tense conjugation of haber. These two both are the same thing grammatically. They're both the present tense he, she form of haber, but I is used in the compound tense. For example, ha comido, he or she has eaten, and then I, we all should know, is there is or there are. There is or there are. Just to point out for haber, a little bit tricky here. This sort of thing doesn't exist in English, but we've got two conjugations of the present tense. I and a both are sort of the same thing, but they've got very different meanings actually, so we cannot use them interchangeably, but they both are in the present tense, a and I. Okay, and then the rest of them, the preterite tense is quite irregular here. The preterite tense is one of the most irregular tenses actually. Most of these verbs are regular in the preterite tense. So ube, ubiste, we're not saying ab, like abe, we're saying ube, the u in there. All of these have the u in there, which make them irregular. And then in the conditional, in the future tense, we've got the letter R there, the stem changes. Abria, instead of saying aberia, it becomes abria. So HABR as the new stem for the future and conditional, and it's the same across, all of these there. Okay, hacer, pretty good verb. So to do or to make, it means both things. Haciendo is perfectly fine. Hecho is another irregular here, just like dicho we said earlier on. This is irregular. Just need to learn this one. Hecho. Um, just to also point out, so de hecho means in fact. It's that sort of same word, hecho. But this sentence, de hecho, this phrase means in fact. But hecho is like made or done. Okay, a couple of regulars here. So the A there, or in this case, sorry, the G actually, isn't it? Comes out of nowhere. But the other ones in the present tense are fine. In the imperfect tense, we've got the I there throughout, which is irregular. And then in the condition, the future tense is again HAR. It's not atheria, it's aria. So that's stem HAR. Okay, moving on to salir. Salir isn't that bad. It's not irregular with the participles here. However, in the present tense, we've got a random G in there, salgo, and sort of salo, it's salgo. The other ones are pretty much okay. And then the future tenses, we've also got SALDR. So we're not saying, for example, salire, it's saldre. So stem changes there, but apart from that, pressure and the imperfect ones are okay. Moving on to said, another really good verb. Obviously, said and astar both meaning to be. If you don't know the differences between them, watch the video that I'm going to put on screen. I go through the differences between said and astar. The participles here are okay. Then we've got lots of irregulars in the present, future, and imperfect tenses. So in the present tense, pretty much all these are irregular. So again, soy, like we saw earlier, doy and estoy. And then eres, es, somos with the O, all of those have some irregulars in there. Some of them you can guess. So somos you can work out is the nosotros form of ser, but the O in there is irregular. The proto tense very different with the letter F there throughout. The F has come from nowhere, but that's fully irregular there. Also in the imperfect tense, again fully irregular. The E comes from nowhere. It's not like it doesn't begin with S, it begins with E. So era, eras, era, éramos, erais, eran, all fully irregular. You just got to learn these. For these ones here in the proto tense are the same as the eared ones, which I'm sure will come up later on. But yeah, fui also means I went as well as I was, and the future and conditional ones are okay there. Okay, moving on to tener. The participles are okay, but we've got a lot of irregulars in sort of for example, the proto tense, as we saw with estar. Tuve, tuviste, tuvo, lots of irregulars. The U and the V sort of come from nowhere. In the present tense, the G is irregular, and the letters I in there. Tiene, tienes. This is it's partly stem changing in the sense that the I is only seen in 1, 2, 3 in those ones. So tienen, we don't say tenemos, we say tenemos. But it's sort of like a sort of stem changing boot verb sort of there, follow similar patterns to those. And in the condition on the future ones, we've got the D that again comes from nowhere, but we know it's quite common. We're seeing DR. Like earlier we saw saldra, here we see tendra. And this is your stem for the future and conditional. You can have your normal endings here, e, as, a, after this, as we see here. So tendre, tendrás, tendrá, etc. Okay, moving on to traer. This is one of the trickier ones in terms of not very common verb as well. We don't use this verb a lot in our daily speech, but traer is a good irregular example. So both these are irregular. Trayendo with the Y and traído with the I, both irregular. And the I form, traigo, if I can highlight that, the I and the G sort of come from nowhere. And then in the preterite tense, a lot of irregulars with the J, that again sort of comes from nowhere. And the other ones are okay, the imperfect and the conditional ones, future ones are okay. Okay, moving on to venir, viniendo in that present participle there. The I comes from nowhere, it's irregular. The G, quite common in the I form, like we saw, like pongo, tengo, traigo, vengo. The G comes from nowhere, but it's there in the I form. The preterite tense is quite irregular. The letter I in there, again, coming from nowhere, but we've just got to learn these irregulars. And in the future tense, again, that DR, vendre, vendrás, stem is different there. Okay, moving on to ver, which is another super common verb. You wouldn't think it, but it's a very common verb for GCSE. It comes up in all different topics. To see something, ver. So visto is regular there. We're not saying, I guess, vido, like he vido, I have seen. We're saying visto, he visto. For example, recientemente he visto is that past participle tense. Then in the present tense, the E in the I form and the also in the you guys form, the vosotros, the E is there irregular, and then in the preterite tense, we've got I and the O, which come from nowhere. The imperfect tense, this is the forms apart from ser and ir, ver is the other imperfect irregular, fully irregular in the imperfect tense. The E and all of this come from sort of nowhere. Normally you'd remove the stem, right? So ver, you'd get rid of the er, and you'd say it, for example, via, but here we're saying veia with the E, and the future and conditional ones are okay. Okay, E is also very irregular, probably the most irregular in this list actually, maybe apart from said. So yendo is irregular, the Y coming from nowhere. Voy, all of these are fully irregular with the V's. Same with fuiste, looks nothing like the conjugations of ir, as you'd expect. I guess because normally in all of these tenses you get rid of the ER completely, so you're left with nothing. So whatever you do add is now fully irregular. And then the imperfect tense also, this is the final irregular in the imperfect tense that we're going to see today, because there were only 3 irregular verbs in the entire language for the imperfect tense. Iba, ibas, iba, fully irregular, and the conditional ones and future ones are fine. Okay, moving through, but almost nearly towards the end actually. Poder isn't too bad. In the, I guess the U here is different, isn't it? So in the present participle, pudiendo, it's not a word you'd use very often, but that is irregular. The O, the U, and the O, it's stem changing. This is a classic stem changing or boot verb. So puedo, puedes, puede, podemos, podéis, and pueden. The U and the E are only present in those first 3 and the last bottom one. The perfect tense is quite irregular. Pude and pudo, and the sort of U and the D in there, quite irregular, and the U sort of throughout as well. It's not pode, it's pude. And the other ones in the imperfect is fine, but in the future and the conditional, we've got the R again, DR throughout there as well. Okay, a couple more to go. We've got 3 left to go. Poner is quite a good one. So pongo is the classic I form with the G. We've seen a lot of in the I form with the G or with the O. So pongo there. We've seen a lot of irregulars in the I form, stuff like doy, which either has a Y, or like pongo has a G. So tengo, pongo, doy, estoy, soy, either sort of ending in OY or ending in GO. Also, the past participle here, puesto, is quite irregular. Then in the present tense, puse, pusiste, a lot of those are quite irregular. And then lastly, in the future and conditional, we've got the DR again. Lots of patterns here. Generally, hopefully you can see the patterns throughout these. The patterns is what's going to help you learn them. So you can learn sort of one, like traer and poner have got quite a similar sort of irregularity. So you can learn the patterns and learn them sort of together like that. And that should help you learn them. Okay, 2 more. Querer, which the participles are fine, but in the preterite tense is quite nasty. Quise, quisiste, quiso, the sort of I and the S there, again, irregular. In the I form, quiero is stem changing, so UI, we see in those 4 places again, the I form, the U form, and the he, she form, and lastly the they form. This is a boot verb or stem changing verb. And then it's also irregular in terms of the stem for the future and the conditional ones. We see a double R here, which is quite unusual, but it's not like querería, it's quería. Pronounced with like sort of double R, like yeah. Okay, and last but not least, saber is quite a tricky one as well. So in the present tense, se, when we say, for example, lo sé or no sé or whatever, it's saying I don't know something, saber. That's irregular there. In the preterite tense, the U and the P, sort of irregular there. And in the conditional and the future tenses, we've got that BR again, so sabría versus sabería, sabría. Okay, and that's all for this video. I'll put some subjunctive ones on screen that you need to know for the present and the imperfect subjunctive. Especially for higher tier students, the more irregular verbs you learn, the better you will do. So please try and learn as many of these as you can. You'll see them in the reading paper, the listening paper, as well as your translation questions. And lastly, if you have any tricks to learn any of these verbs, drop them in the comments. Vale. Adios.